The colony world Dajon floated silent in space, looking abandoned and broken. War Master Krell studied the planet from his flagship, suspicious but confident. The humans had evacuated their colonies before, running like frightened animals. This looked no different. Debris filled the orbit, pieces of destroyed satellites and damaged ships drifting in the dark. Power signatures on the surface were weak and scattered. Refugees, his tactical officer reported, hiding in underground shelters. Perhaps a few thousand? Krell smiled, showing his sharp teeth. Send in the assault teams. Make them an example. I want the rest of the humans to know what happens when they resist the Valthari Empire. His forward fleet moved into position, 300 warships surrounding the planet. Dropships launched toward the surface, carrying troops to dig out the refugees. It was routine. The Valthari had done this 1,000 times to 100 different species. There was no reason to expect anything different. That was their mistake. Commander Sang-hyun watched from his command ship hidden behind Dajon's moon. He could see the Valthari fleet on his displays, every ship exactly where he had predicted they would be. Predictable. The Valthari always used overwhelming force. They always committed fully to destroying what they saw as weak targets, and that predictability was about to kill them. All units, Sang-hyun said quietly. Execute! The debris in orbit suddenly came alive. What the Valthari had thought were destroyed satellites were actually weapons platforms, their power signatures masked by clever engineering. What looked like drifting wreckage were camouflaged warships, their engines cold but their weapons ready. Captain Borum's ship, the TCS Retribution, had been floating like a dead hulk for 6 hours, her crew barely breathing as they waited for this moment. Fire everything, Sang-hyun ordered. Hell erupted in Dajon's orbit. The first missiles struck before the Valthari even knew they were under attack. Plasma torpedoes designed by Jiho's team burned through shields that had never been tested against weapons this aggressive. Railgun rounds traveling at incredible speeds punched through armor plating designed to stop conventional weapons. The Valthari ships tried to respond, but they were scattered, focused on the planet below, unprepared for an ambush. Captain Borum's weapons officer was a former mining technician named Jae-hyun. He had spent 20 years using cutting lasers to slice through asteroids. Now he used military-grade lasers to slice through Valthari warships. His hands were steady as he targeted engine sections, weapon ports, command bridges. Each shot was precise, economical, deadly. Target destroyed, he reported calmly, moving to the next one. Captain Woojin commanded the TCS Vengeance, using the asteroid field near Dajon to mask his movements. He had studied the ancient naval battles from Earth's oceans, understanding how terrain could be used even in space. The Valthari had superior shields and weapons, but they fought in open space, relying on their technological advantage. Woojin used the asteroids for cover, striking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the Valthari could return fire. Engineer Sujin monitored the ship's engines, pushing them beyond their rated capacity. Warning lights flashed across her console, telling her that the reactor was running too hot, that the engines would fail if she kept pushing them like this. She ignored the warnings. Her brother had died at Tajan Station. If pushing the engines to failure would kill a few more Valthari, it was worth it. We don't need the warranty, she muttered, redirecting more power to the weapon systems. On the planet's surface, what War Master Krell thought were helpless refugees were actually Lieutenant Dong-hyun's special forces. They had been waiting in prepared positions for weeks, living in the cold and dark, eating rations and watching the Valthari fleet gather overhead. Now the Valthari dropships were coming down, and Dong-hyun's people were ready. The first dropship landed in what looked like an abandoned industrial sector. Valthari soldiers poured out, weapons ready, expecting to find frightened civilians. Instead, they found a killing ground. The buildings around them had been rigged with explosives. The streets had been turned into mazes with only one safe path, and Dong-hyun's people knew exactly where that path was. The explosions came first, disorienting the Valthari and destroying their heavy equipment. Then came the gunfire from a dozen different positions. The Valthari were trained soldiers, but they had never fought enemies like this. Humans who knew the terrain perfectly, humans who used every advantage. Humans who fought with cold calculation, sacrificing their own safety to achieve victory. Sergeant Minji commanded a squad defending a collapsed shopping center. She had been a security guard before the war, keeping teenagers from shoplifting and breaking up arguments in parking lots. Now she directed her squad with tactical precision learned from the War Archive. They held their fire until the Valthari were in the perfect position, then struck from 3 angles simultaneously. When the Valthari tried to retreat, they found the path blocked by remote-controlled explosives. The Valthari had better armor, better weapons, better shields. But they were fighting on human terms now, and that made all the difference. In orbit, the battle was turning into a massacre. Pilot Nari led her squadron in attack runs that would have horrified her instructors during training. She pushed her fighter to speeds that made her vision blur and her body scream. The Valthari point defense systems were designed to track missiles and torpedoes, not fighters moving this fast and this aggressively. Her wingman was a pilot named Kyung-ho, a quiet man who had lost his entire family at Hanseong Colony. He flew with a recklessness that terrified and inspired his squadron. When his fighter took critical damage from a Valthari destroyer, he did not eject. Instead, he aimed his dying ship at the destroyer's sensor array and accelerated. "For Hanseong," he said quietly over the comm. The explosion blinded the destroyer's sensors, and in that moment of blindness, Nari's squadron struck the command bridge. The destroyer listed to one side, dead in space, hundreds of Valthari crew dying in the cold vacuum. Nari felt tears on her face but did not stop flying. There would be time to mourn later. Right now, there was only the mission. War Master Krell watched his forward fleet die and could not understand it. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to surrender or die. They were not supposed to fight like this, not supposed to use tactics that turned their disadvantages into advantages, not supposed to be willing to sacrifice themselves for tactical gains. "Retreat," he screamed at his surviving ships. "Pull back to the rally point." But the humans had anticipated that too. As the Valthari ships tried to disengage, they found their escape routes blocked by mines and ambush forces. Commander Sang-hyun had studied the Valthari tactics for months. He knew how they would respond to every situation, and he had prepared counters for all of it. Of the 300 ships War Master Krell brought to Daejeon, only 11 escaped. The rest were destroyed or captured. On the surface, Lieutenant Dong-hyun's forces took heavy casualties, but they held every position. The Valthari ground troops were either dead or surrendered, confused and demoralized by an enemy that fought nothing like they expected. When the battle ended, Daejeon's surface was scarred by explosions and fire. 30% of the defending fleet was destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. 2,000 human soldiers were dead, but the Valthari forward fleet was annihilated. More importantly, humanity had proven something crucial. They could win. Commander Sang-hyun broadcast a message on all frequencies, knowing the Valthari would hear it. "So would every other species in the galaxy. You launched the first strike against humanity, believing we would surrender. You killed our civilians, destroyed our colonies, and mocked our desire for peace. You were wrong about us. We are not the weak prey you thought. We are survivors of 10,000 years of warfare against ourselves. We learned to be peaceful, but we never forgot how to fight. This is humanity's answer to your aggression. This is just the beginning. We will not stop until there is no enemy left standing." The message reached the Valthari homeworld hours later. In the throne room of the High Command, the Supreme Leaders heard Sang-hyun's words, and for the first time in millennia, they felt something they had not experienced in living memory: fear on Earth. President Ji-won watched the casualty reports and felt the weight of every name. 2,000 soldiers dead, families destroyed, children who would grow up without parents. The price of victory was always paid in blood, but the alternative was extinction. So she signed the orders for the next phase of the campaign and tried not to think about how many more names would be added to that list before this was over. Captain Borum stood on the bridge of the TCS Retribution and looked at the damaged Valthari ships drifting in space. She felt no satisfaction, no joy in the victory, just tired determination. This was one battle. The war was far from over, but humanity had shown the galaxy something important. The peaceful explorers, the friendly traders, the curious scientists were still there. But underneath that peaceful exterior was something older and darker. Something that had nearly destroyed itself but had survived through adaptability, ruthlessness, and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. The Valthari had thought they were hunting prey. They had just discovered they had walked into a trap set by a predator. The War Archive had been sealed for 217 years. Commander Sang-Yoon stood before its massive doors deep beneath the desert and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Dr. Chang Min, the archive's guardian, was an old man now, bent and tired. He had spent his entire life watching over something he prayed would never be opened again. "Are you certain?" Chang Min asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sang-Yoon thought about the footage from the colonies. The burning cities. The bodies. "We have no choice." The old man nodded slowly and entered the access codes. The doors opened with a sound like thunder. Inside was humanity's darkest secret. The galaxy knew humans as peaceful explorers, friendly traders, curious scientists. What the galaxy did not know was that this peaceful nature had been a choice, one made after humanity had nearly destroyed itself. For 10,000 years, humans had fought each other with increasing brutality, wars that killed millions, weapons that could crack continents, a final conflict that had pushed the species to the very edge of extinction. When humanity reached the stars, the survivors made a decision. They would be better. They would put away their weapons and their hatred. They would become something new. But they did not destroy their knowledge of war. They stored it, hoping their children's children would never need it. They were wrong. Sang-Yoon walked through the archives halls, and each room made his heart heavier. Military strategy databases covering every human conflict, weapon designs from the final wars, tactical training programs, the collected wisdom of thousands of military leaders across human history. All of it had been waiting in the dark, sleeping but not dead. He activated the main terminal. Information flooded his implants. Battle tactics, psychological warfare, logistics, supply chain disruption, guerrilla combat. He saw how humans had fought when everything was at stake, when survival meant being more ruthless than the enemy. It was brutal knowledge bought with rivers of blood, but it would keep humanity alive. Across human space, the transformation began. President Ji-won had declared total mobilization, and humanity responded. Civilian shipyards that built cargo haulers and passenger vessels now worked around-the-clock building warships. Mining facilities shifted to producing armor plating and weapons. Every resource humanity had was turned toward one goal: survival. Captain Borum had spent 20 years flying mining ships through asteroid fields. She was good at her job, finding valuable minerals in the chaos of broken rocks. Now she stood on the bridge of her ship and barely recognized it. Military engineers had stripped away everything unnecessary and filled the empty spaces with missiles, railguns, and shield generators. Her mining ship was now the TCS Retribution, a warship built for one purpose. "It feels wrong," her first officer muttered, looking at the weapon systems. Borum thought about the children she had seen in the footage from Tajan Colony. "No," she said quietly. "What the Valthari did was wrong. This is just necessary." On the colony world Sejong, teacher Hyunwoo received his draft notice. He was 47 years old and had not worn a military uniform in 20 years. But he had served in the Coalition Defense Force when he was young, and now humanity needed every person who knew how to fight. He kissed his wife goodbye and reported for duty, wondering if he would ever see her again. In the research labs of Earth, scientist Jiho worked on designs she had theorized about but never wanted to build. She believed in peace and using science to help people. Now she was designing weapons. The math was beautiful in a terrible way. If she adjusted the plasma containment field just right, the explosion would be 17% more destructive. If she modified the missile guidance system, it could track targets through interference that would blind conventional sensors. Every breakthrough made her feel sick. Every success meant more death. But the Valthari had shown humanity what happened to peaceful species. So Jiho swallowed her disgust and kept working. Young Nari had just turned 20 when the Valthari attacked. She watched her parents die in the orbital bombardment of Busan Colony. The explosion that killed them had been visible from orbit, a bright flash that erased everything she loved. She reported to the recruitment center the next day with empty eyes and a heart full of rage. The training was brutal. The instructors had learned their craft from the war archive, teaching methods that had not been used in 2 centuries. They broke the recruits down and built them back up as soldiers. Nari learned to fly fighter craft at speeds that made her body scream. She learned to fire weapons with cold precision. She learned to watch her friends die in training accidents and keep going, because the Valthari would be worse. While humanity transformed itself, the Valthari continued their advance. They took 3 more colonies with ease, killing anyone who resisted. War Master Krell sent regular reports to the Valthari High Command, confident that the human problem would be solved within weeks. The humans had a few warships, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. It would be a massacre. In one intercepted transmission that spread through human military channels, a Valthari officer mocked humanity's resistance. "They die like startled herd animals," he said, laughing. "This is hardly worth the ammunition." That transmission was played during training exercises. Instructors made sure every human soldier heard it. "They think you're animals," they said. "Show them what humans really are." But Commander Sang-hyun was not trying to match the Valthari in open battle. He studied their tactics, their patterns, their thinking. The Valthari had been the galaxy's dominant power for so long that they had become predictable. They fought with overwhelming force against isolated targets. They expected enemies to either surrender or die. They had never faced an enemy who understood strategic depth. In the command center, Captain Wu Jin looked at the strategic maps and understood what Sang-hyun was planning. "We're not trying to stop them," he said slowly. "We're letting them push deeper into our territory." Sang-hyun nodded. "The Valthari fight like a hammer. Massive, powerful, unstoppable. But a hammer only works if it can hit its target. We're going to make them extend their supply lines, spread their forces thin, commit to positions we choose. And then we're going to show them what happens when the prey becomes the predator." Tactical Officer Sulgi asked the question everyone was thinking. "How many more colonies do we sacrifice?" Sang-hyun's face was stone. "As many as it takes to position them exactly where we want them." It was a cold calculation. Every colony lost was thousands of lives. But if they fought the Valthari head-on, humanity would lose everything. So they traded space for time, and they prepared their trap. Meanwhile, Ambassador Minho traveled to alien worlds, meeting with representatives from species that had learned to fear the Valthari. The insectoid Cheethar had been conquered by the Valthari centuries ago. They sent secret messages of sympathy to humanity, but would not risk helping openly. The crystalline Ziven maintained strict neutrality, having learned not to interfere in Valthari affairs. But Minho planted seeds in his conversations. He did not boast or threaten. He simply shared humanity's history. "We were not always peaceful," he told them quietly. "We chose peace after we learned the true cost of war. The Valthari believe they're seeing humanity at our weakest. They're about to see humanity at our most desperate, and desperate humans are the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy." Some of the alien diplomats looked at him with pity, thinking he was delusional. Others, who had studied human history, looked at him with something else. Fear, because they understood what he was really saying. Humanity had nearly destroyed itself with their weapons and their hatred. Now they were turning all of that toward an external enemy. 3 months after the first attack, humanity's transformation was complete. The coalition navy had tripled in size. Every major colony had defense fleets. Millions of civilians had been trained as soldiers. The weapons that had been theoretical designs were now real and ready to use. On Earth, President Jiwon reviewed the reports and felt a mixture of pride and horror. Humanity had accomplished in 3 months what should have taken years. But the cost was visible everywhere. The economy had been gutted and redirected toward war production. Civilians were rationing food and power. Children were being taught how to reach bomb shelters. Humanity had become a weapon aimed at the Valthari Empire. She received a final report from Commander Sang-hyun. The trap was ready. The Valthari were exactly where humanity needed them to be. "It was time. Give the order," she said. Sang-hyun sent the signal. Across human space, warships powered up their engines. Soldiers checked their weapons one final time. Pilots climbed into their fighters. The prey was done running. Now humanity would show the Valthari the truth. Humans had not survived 10,000 years of warfare against each other by being weak. They had survived by being adaptable, ruthless, and willing to pay any price for victory. The Valthari had awakened something that had been sleeping. Now they would face the consequences. They launched the first strike, but humanity left no enemy standing at HFY. Humanity, fuck yeah. Sci-Fi Story Outline Part 1. The Arrogance of the Valthari Empire Setting. The year is 2847. Humanity has colonized 17 star systems and established the Terran Coalition, a peaceful federation focused on exploration and trade. The galaxy knows humans as curious, adaptable, but ultimately unremarkable compared to ancient powers like the Valthari Empire. The Valthari Empire, a militaristic civilization spanning 300 worlds. The Valthari have conquered dozens of species over millennia. They view themselves as the galaxy's rightful rulers, enforcing order through overwhelming force. The incident at Tajin Station. Admiral Daiho commands the Terran Coalition's outermost research station orbiting the ice planet, Tajin 7. His crew includes Chief Science Officer Hyejin, who has been studying exotic matter, and Communications Officer Mirai, who maintains diplomatic channels with neighboring species. The Valthari Warmaster Krell arrives with a battle fleet, demanding humanity surrender all territories and technology. When Daiho refuses and appeals to galactic law, Krell laughs. The Valthari don't recognize laws made by lesser species. Krell gives humanity 72 hours to comply. Humanity's response, back on Earth, Coalition President Jiwon convenes an emergency council. Military Commander Sang Yun warns that the Valthari fleet outnumbers human forces 10-1. Diplomat Yunji argues for negotiation, believing war can be avoided. President Jiwon makes a decision that shocks the council. She orders a full military mobilization but sends one final peace envoy, a message stating humanity wishes no conflict but will defend itself if necessary. The first strike 60 hours later. Without waiting for the deadline or a response, the Valthari unleash a devastating attack. Tajin Station is vaporized. Admiral Daiho and 3,000 crew members die instantly. Simultaneously, Valthari forces strike 4 human colonies, killing millions of civilians in orbital bombardments. The message is clear. Humanity is to be an example, a warning to all species who might resist Valthari supremacy. The aftermath on Earth. The world watches in horror as footage of the attack spreads. Colonist Youngsu sees his family on Tajin colony reduced to ash. Engineer Sujin receives the last transmission from her brother aboard the research station. A scream cut short. President Jiwon addresses humanity with tears in her eyes and steel in her voice. They wanted to break us. They have made a fatal miscalculation. Humanity does not break. We rise. Commander Sang Yun activates Protocol Omega, a contingency plan humanity prayed they'd never use. Part 2. The Awakening. The truth about humanity, what the Valthari don't know. Humans are not the peaceful explorers they appear to be by choice but by tremendous effort. Humanity's history is soaked in blood. 10,000 years of warfare that nearly destroyed their own species multiple times. When humans reached the stars, they made a collective decision. Never again. They buried their weapons, their warships, their very capacity for organized violence, hoping to become something better. But they didn't destroy it. They archived it. The ghosts of old Earth deep beneath the Gobi Desert, Commander Sang Yun enters a facility that hasn't been opened in 2 centuries. The War Archive. Inside are the collected works of humanity's greatest military minds, Sun Tzu, Clausewitz, Rommel, Patton, and thousands more. Tactical databases covering every human conflict, weapon designs from the terrible final wars. Dr. Changmin, the archive's sole guardian, hands Sang Yun the activation codes with shaking hands. I prayed I'd die before this day came. Sang Yun replies grimly, so did I. Mobilization across human space. The transformation begins. Civilian shipyards shift to military production. The mining ship Captain Borum receives new orders. Her vessel will be retrofitted with experimental weapons. Teacher Hyunwoo on Colony World Sejong finds himself drafted. He served in the Coalition Defense Force decades ago. Scientist Jiho, who has spent years advocating for peaceful coexistence, now works around the clock designing weapons based on theories she developed, but never wanted tested. Young recruit Nari, barely 20 years old, enters basic training. She saw her parents die in the orbital strikes. Her eyes hold no tears anymore, only determination. The Valthari advance confident in their superiority. The Valthari continue their assault. They take 3 more human colonies with ease. Warmaster Krell reports to the Valthari High Command that the human problem will be solved within weeks. In intercepted communications, Valthari officers mock humanity's feeble resistance. One transmission becomes infamous among human forces. They die like startled herd animals. This is hardly worth the ammunition. The hidden hand commander Sang-hyun reveals the coalition's true strategy to his senior staff. Captain Woo-jin, a veteran of border conflicts, immediately understands, "We're not trying to stop them. We're letting them push deeper." "Exactly," Sang-hyun confirms. "The Valthari fight with overwhelming force against isolated targets. They've never faced an enemy who understands strategic depth." Tactical Officer Seolgi asks the hard question, "How many more colonies do we sacrifice?" Sang-hyun's face is carved from stone, "As many as it takes to position them exactly where we want them." The galaxy watches other species observe the Valthari campaign with grim resignation. The insectoid Chithar, previously conquered by the Valthari, sends secret sympathies to humanity. The crystalline Zivan maintains strict neutrality, having learned not to interfere with Valthari affairs. But Ambassador Minho plants seeds. In quiet conversations with alien diplomats, he shares humanity's true history, not to boast, but to warn. "We have shown you who we wish to be. The Valthari are about to see who we were." Part 3. The Counterstrike Preparation. Complete. 3 months after the first strike, humanity's transformation is complete. The coalition navy has tripled in size. Every civilian ship has been weaponized. Soldiers trained in archived tactics that haven't been used in centuries now move with deadly efficiency. Captain Borum stands on the bridge of her former mining ship, now the TCS Retribution. Her crew of former civilians has become a weapon forged in grief and determination. Young Nari, now a fighter pilot, sits in her cockpit reviewing attack patterns. Her squadron calls themselves Tajin's Ghosts, named for the first massacre. The trap springs, the Valthari push toward humanity's core worlds, expecting the same easy victories. Instead, they find the colony world Dijon seemingly abandoned, its orbit dense with debris and disabled satellites. War Master Krell, suspicious but confident, sends his forward fleet to investigate. They detect faint power signatures on the planet's surface, refugees hiding in underground shelters. He orders planetary assault teams to descend. As dropships enter the atmosphere, the trap activates. Hell unleashed, the debris in orbit reveals itself as camouflaged warships. Disabled satellites are actually missile platforms. Commander Sang-hyun's voice cuts across all frequencies. "Fire everything." The Valthari forward fleet is caught in a kill zone. Coordinated fire from hidden positions tears through their shields. They've never faced this before. Humans fighting with cold calculation, using terrain and deception. On the surface, what Krell thought were helpless refugees are actually special forces led by Lieutenant Dong-hyun. They've lured the Valthari ground troops into prepared positions. Urban warfare, humanity's oldest and deadliest art. The Battle of Daejeon, the engagement becomes legendary. Captain Woo-jin commands the TCS Vengeance, using asteroid fields to mask his approach before striking Valthari capital ships from blind angles. Engineer Sujin, who lost her brother at Taijin, has modified the ship's engines to run beyond safety limits. "We won't need the warranty," she tells Woo-jin grimly. Pilot Nari leads her squadron in attack runs that ignore conventional safety margins. The Valthari have superior shields and armor, but they've never fought an enemy willing to trade damage for position, to sacrifice safety for advantage. Fighter pilot Kyung-ho performs a maneuver that will be studied for generations, using his damaged ship's explosion to blind Valthari sensors, allowing his wingmates to strike the enemy flagship's bridge. The cost humanity wins, but the victory is brutal. Daejeon's surface is scarred by the battle. 30% of the defending fleet is destroyed. Lieutenant Dong-hyun's special forces take heavy casualties, but the Valthari forward fleet is annihilated. Of the 300 ships War Master Krell sent to Daejeon, 11 escape. The message commander Sang-hyun broadcasts to the retreating Valthari ships and to the galaxy. "You struck first. You murdered our civilians. You believed we would surrender. You were wrong. This is humanity's answer. This is only the beginning." In Valthari High Command, for the first time in millennia, the supreme leaders feel something unfamiliar. Fear. The prey has become the predator. Part 4. Total War, the Valthari Dilemma. War Master. Krell returns to the Valthari homeworld Valtros in disgrace. The High Command is divided. Some advocate for peace negotiations. Others demand total mobilization. No species has ever humiliated the Empire like this. Supreme Commander Vex makes the decision: crush humanity completely. The full might of the Valthari Armada is mobilized. 3,000 warships, the largest fleet ever assembled. But there's a problem. Military intelligence officer Thana warns the High Command. Humans aren't fighting like any species we've encountered. They're adaptive, they're learning from every engagement. Operation Nightfall launched on a moonless night, though that meant nothing in space. Commander Sangyun had coordinated the largest military operation in human history. Every warship humanity possessed, every soldier, every weapon system would strike simultaneously at Valthari installations across 50 star systems. It was a strategy that required perfect timing and enormous risk. If it failed, humanity would have nothing left to fight with. Captain Borum commanded one of the assault fleets targeting the Valthari forward headquarters at Corvin. Her fleet was outnumbered 3-1, but she had learned that numbers did not tell the whole story. The TCS Retribution led the charge, her crew working with the smooth efficiency of people who had been fighting together for months. Engineer Sujin watched the power systems with fierce concentration. She had pushed these engines past their limits so many times that she knew exactly how much they could take. Now for this final battle, she would push them beyond even that. The engines screamed in protest, running at 120% capacity. Warning lights flashed red across every display. She ignored them all. "Just hold together a little longer," she whispered to the ship. "Just until this is over." The Valthari defended Corvin with desperate strength. They knew this was their last stand. If they lost here, the Empire was finished. Their warships formed defensive formations that had protected them for centuries. But Captain Borum had studied those formations. She knew where the weak points were. "All ships execute ramming speed protocol," she ordered. It was a tactic that horrified traditional military commanders, ships accelerating directly at enemy vessels, firing at point-blank range, accepting massive damage to deliver devastating strikes. It was suicidal. It was also brutally effective. The TCS Retribution charged through Valthari fire, her shields failing, her armor burning away. But she kept going. At the last moment, Borum pulled up, raking the Valthari command ship with every weapon she had. The enemy ship's shields collapsed and secondary explosions rippled through its hull. "Target destroyed," Tactical Officer Jae-hyun reported, his voice shaking slightly. "We took severe damage. Multiple hull breaches, but we are still flying." Lieutenant Dong-hyun's special forces landed on Valthari military stations and fought through them room by room. The close-quarters combat was savage. The Valthari were fierce warriors with better armor and weapons. But Dong-hyun's people fought with the desperation of those defending their species. They used every trick from humanity's long history of urban warfare. Sergeant Minji led her squad through a Valthari command center, moving through rooms filled with enemies. Her team had taken 50% casualties, but they kept pushing forward. When they ran out of ammunition, they used captured Valthari weapons. When those ran out, they fought hand-to-hand. By the time they secured the command center, only 3 members of her original squad were still standing. But they had won. In orbit above the Valthari homeworld Valtros, the final battle began. Supreme Commander Vex had assembled 1,000 warships to defend his home. It was still the largest fleet in the sector. But Commander Sangyun's forces attacked with a coordination and aggression the Valthari had never encountered. Pilot Nari led her fighter squadrons in the opening strike. They had to break through the outer defenses to let the capital ships advance. The Valthari point defense was murderous. Nari watched fighters explode around her, young pilots dying in flashes of light. She wanted to scream, to cry, to turn back, but she kept flying, because if they failed here, every death up to this point would be meaningless. Her squadron found a gap in the Valthari defensive grid. It was small and heavily guarded, but it was there. "All fighters follow me through," she ordered. They dove into hell. Half her squadron died in that run, but the survivors punched through, and behind them came the human capital ships. Captain Wu Jin commanded the assault on the Valthari orbital fortresses. He used every lesson learned from months of combat. The TCS Vengeance danced through enemy fire, using debris clouds for cover, striking from unexpected angles. His crew worked like a single organism, each person knowing exactly what to do. When the orbital fortress focused its weapons on the Vengeance, Wu Jin deliberately drew its fire, keeping it distracted while other ships moved into position. His ship took terrible damage. Compartments decompressed. Systems failed. But he held position just long enough for Captain Borum's fleet to strike the fortress from behind. The fortress exploded in a cascade of secondary detonations. Tactical Officer Silgi coordinated the fleet movements from Earth, analyzing the battle in real time. She had studied Valthari tactics for months and could predict their responses. When the Valthari tried to reform their defensive line, she saw the pattern forming and directed ships to exploit the gaps. The Valthari still fought as if victory was assured, maintaining textbook formations even as those formations became death traps. "They have not adapted," she reported to Commander Sanghyun. "They are still fighting the way they always have, and that was killing them." In the Valthari command ship, Supreme Commander Vex watched his fleet crumble. He could not understand it. His ships were better. His weapons were superior. His troops were elite warriors. How were the humans winning? Military intelligence officer Thana stood beside him, and she understood what he did not. Because they remember what we forgot. War is not about superiority. It is about desperation and the will to endure anything for survival. We have been dominant for so long that we forgot how to truly fight. Vex screamed orders for a final assault, but half his commanders refused. They had seen too many of their people die. The Valthari fleet was splintering, ships retreating or surrendering despite orders to fight to the death. War Master Krell made his last stand at the orbital fortress above Valtros. He refused all surrender offers. He still believed in Valthari supremacy, still could not accept that the lesser species had defeated him. He fought to the last, his weapons firing even as his fortress broke apart around him. He died not understanding that arrogance had killed him more surely than any human weapon. The battle for Valtros lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the Valthari fleet was destroyed. Supreme Commander Vex was captured along with most of the High Command. The Valthari Empire, which had ruled 300 worlds for millennia, collapsed within days. Colony worlds declared independence. Former subject species rose up. The galaxy that had lived under Valthari dominance was suddenly free, but the cost was terrible. Humanity lost 40% of its fleet in Operation Nightfall. Tens of thousands of soldiers died. Colonies were devastated. The economic toll would take generations to recover from. President Jiwon stood before the Galactic Assembly and addressed the representatives of 100 species. She was exhausted, grief-stricken, but her voice was steady. Humanity did not want this war. We tried to be better than our violent past. We chose peace, hoping to show the galaxy a better way. The Valthari destroyed that hope. They forced us to become what we had worked so hard not to be. We won, but do not mistake this for glory. War is never glorious. It is only necessary sometimes. We pray this was the last time. She paused, looking at each representative. Now we face a choice. We can return to the path of peace, or we can become the very thing we destroyed. We can be kind again, or we can let the violence consume us. I know what humanity will choose. We will choose peace, but we will never forget what we learned. We will never be helpless again. To all species watching, we offer friendship, trade, and cooperation. But know this: if you threaten us or those under our protection, you will face what the Valthari faced. We are kind because we choose to be, not because we have no other choice. Commander Sanghyun retired immediately after the war ended. He could not sleep without seeing the faces of the soldiers he had sent to die. He had won humanity's survival, but the cost haunted him. He lived quietly on a small colony world, trying to find peace he was not sure he deserved. Captain Borum converted the TCS Retribution back to a mining ship, but she kept the weapons installed. "Just in case," she said. She never flew through an asteroid field again without checking her weapon systems first. The galaxy had taught her that peace was temporary. Pilot Nari became a flight instructor, training the next generation. She made sure every pilot understood what war really meant. Not glory or honor, but death and sacrifice. She taught them to be skilled, to be careful, to value their lives. But she also taught them to be ready, because humanity could not afford to be unprepared again. Engineer Sujin designed the memorial on the rebuilt Taejin station. It was a simple wall listing every name of those who died in the war. 4 million civilians in the first attacks, hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the battles that followed. At the top it read, "They struck first. We finished it. May we never need to again." Dr. Jiho returned to peaceful research, but she kept all her weapons designs carefully archived. She hated those designs. They represented the worst of what humanity could create. But she understood they might be needed again, so she preserved them, hoping they would gather dust forever. Scientist Changmin returned to the war archive as its guardian. But now he had a new assistant. Youngsu, the colonist who had become a resistance fighter, took over the role. The news of the defeat at Daejeon reached the Valthari homeworld like a thunderclap. War Master Krell returned in disgrace, his career destroyed, his reputation shattered. The High Command met in emergency session, and for the first time in living memory they argued. Some advocated for peace negotiations. Supreme Council member Thana reviewed the battle reports and saw something that terrified her. The humans were not just lucky, they were learning. Every engagement showed new tactics, new adaptations. The humans studied their enemies and adjusted their strategies accordingly. The Valthari had not needed to do that in centuries, but Supreme Commander Vex refused to consider peace. One defeat does not make them our equals, he declared. We will mobilize the full armada. 3,000 warships. Every species that has ever opposed us learned the same lesson. Numbers and power will prevail. Military intelligence officer Thana tried to warn him. Commander, the humans do not fight like other species. They accept casualties that would break any other civilization. They use deception and adaptation. They turn their weaknesses into advantages. This is not an enemy we can defeat through simple force. Vex silenced her with a gesture. Prepare the final assault. Humanity will be crushed completely. The largest fleet in Valthari history began to mobilize. 3,000 warships built over centuries of conquest, crewed by soldiers who had never known defeat. They would sweep through human space like a tidal wave, destroying everything in their path. It would be the end of humanity, but Commander Sangyun had no intention of fighting them head-on. We cannot match their numbers, he told the War Council, but we can make those numbers meaningless. We force them to spread out, to occupy territory, to defend supply lines. We hit them where they are weak and vanish before they can respond. We make them bleed for every meter of space. President Jiwan approved the strategy, though it meant more suffering for human colonies. Do what must be done, she said quietly. Humanity shifted to guerrilla warfare. Captain Borum's fleet became raiders, striking Valthari supply convoys and vanishing into asteroid fields before reinforcements could arrive. Her crew learned to live on their ships for weeks at a time, sleeping in shifts, eating rations, always moving. They hit fuel depots, ammunition stores, troop transports. Each strike was small, but there were hundreds of strikes across dozens of systems. The Valthari tried to protect their supply lines by assigning escorts to every convoy. But that meant pulling ships from the main fleet. They tried to hunt down the raiders, but Captain Borum knew the asteroid fields and nebulae better than they did. She would lead Valthari hunters into dense debris fields where their larger ships could not follow, then circle back and hit them from behind. Engineer Sujin developed new tactics for each raid. She learned to shut down the ship's power systems completely, making them invisible to Valthari sensors, then restart everything in seconds when it was time to strike. She pushed the engines past every safety limit, knowing that if they broke down, they would all die. But the engines held, and the TCS retribution became a ghost that the Valthari could not catch. Ambassador Minho's diplomatic efforts finally bore fruit. The Chithar, having watched humanity's resistance with growing hope, secretly allowed human forces to stage from their territory. It was dangerous for them. If the Valthari discovered they were helping, the Chithar would face terrible retribution. But they did it anyway, inspired by humanity's refusal to surrender. The crystalline Zivan, who had maintained strict neutrality for centuries, quietly began sharing intelligence about Valthari fleet movements. They told themselves it was just information, not direct help. But that information saved thousands of human lives. On occupied worlds, resistance cells activated. Youngsu, who had lost his family at Taejin Colony, now led insurgents on captured Hanseong. The Valthari occupied the cities with overwhelming force, but they could not control the countryside. Every supply convoy that left the cities was ambushed. Every patrol that ventured too far disappeared. The Valthari soldiers began to fear the humans they had once mocked. The insurgents used every trick humanity had learned in 10,000 years of warfare. They built improvised explosives from mining equipment. They hacked Valthari communication networks. They struck at night and vanished by dawn. The Valthari could win battles, but they could not win peace. Youngsu's cell captured a Valthari supply depot using nothing but mining charges and careful timing. They did not try to hold the depot. They destroyed everything inside and disappeared before reinforcements arrived. The Valthari response was predictable. They burned a nearby village in retaliation, killing 50 humans, but that brutality only created more insurgents. Every family that lost someone to Valthari violence produced new fighters. The occupation was bleeding the Valthari, slowly but steadily. In space, pilot Nari's squadron had become legends. They trained new pilots in the harsh lessons they had learned, passing on knowledge bought with blood. Nari herself had been promoted to squadron commander after her heroics at Dijon, but she refused to stop flying combat missions. The Valthari have better ships and better weapons, she told her new pilots, so we do not fight their strengths. We are faster, more aggressive, and we are willing to take risks they will not. They fight to dominate. We fight to survive. That makes us more dangerous. She led by example, flying missions that should have killed her a dozen times over. Her fighter was covered in scorch marks and patch damage. Her crew chief begged her to take a new ship, but she refused. This ship had carried her through Dijon. It would carry her until the war ended or she died. Scientist Jiho developed new weapons specifically designed to counter Valthari advantages. The Hellstrike missile sacrificed range and explosive power for one critical feature. It was almost impossible to detect until impact. The Valthari's advanced sensor systems, which had always given them tactical superiority, suddenly became less reliable. They could not trust their own technology. Every engagement taught humanity new lessons. The Valthari shields were strongest at the front, weaker at the rear. Their capital ships were powerful but slow to turn. Their fighters were heavily armored but less maneuverable. Humanity learned to exploit every weakness, to turn every Valthari strength into a liability. 6 months into the campaign, the Valthari made a critical mistake. They captured Busan Station, humanity's largest shipyard, believing it would cripple human production. They fortified it heavily, assigning 200 warships and their most elite troops. Supreme Commander Vex declared it a great victory, proof that humanity was failing. Commander Sang-hyun smiled when he heard the news. The Valthari had just concentrated a large portion of their fleet in one location, exactly as he had hoped they would. While the Valthari celebrated, Commander Woojin led a lightning campaign to liberate 6 occupied colonies. The Valthari had pulled ships from those colonies to defend Busan Station, leaving them vulnerable. Woojin's fleet moved faster than the Valthari thought possible, hitting each colony in quick succession. The liberation forces were careful to minimize civilian casualties, but they showed no mercy to Valthari troops. Then the real blow fell. Demolitions expert Insu had volunteered to remain behind on Busan Station when it was evacuated. He had spent 3 weeks rigging the entire facility with explosives, hiding charges in power conduits and reactor cores. The Valthari never suspected anything. Why would the humans destroy their own shipyard? When Insu received the signal, he sent one final transmission to Earth. For Taejin, for Hanseong, for every human who died, for humanity. Then he triggered the charges. The explosion was visible from 3 light minutes away. Busan Station simply ceased to exist, taking the entire Valthari garrison fleet with it. 200 warships, thousands of soldiers, and the Valthari's elite commanders died in an instant. The psychological impact was devastating. The Valthari had never faced an enemy willing to destroy their own infrastructure to win. Supreme Commander Vex screamed for more ships, more troops, more resources. But the Valthari Empire was stretched thin. Holding occupied territory required constant reinforcement. Protecting supply lines tied up ships that could be fighting. The guerrilla attacks and ambushes created a constant drain on resources. And then the unthinkable happened. Valthari colony worlds, seeing the Empire's weakness, began to refuse conscription orders. Some openly rebelled. Species that had been conquered centuries ago saw humanity's example and found their courage. If humans could resist, maybe they could too. Military intelligence officer Thana watched the Empire crumbling from within and made a decision. She sent a secret transmission to Commander Sang-hyun, giving him detailed information about Valthari fleet positions, supply routes, and internal conflicts. Her message was simple: please end this. The Empire has brought nothing but suffering to the galaxy. Humanity has shown us that the Valthari can be defeated. Finish what you started. When Sang-hyun shared this intelligence with President Ji-won, she understood what it meant. The Valthari were collapsing. Humanity could win, but it would require one final massive effort. One last push that would cost thousands more lives. Then let's finish it, she said. Commander Sang-hyun began planning Operation Nightfall. Every human warship, every soldier, every weapon would be committed.